Hello, my name is Jillian, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Maria Montessori and her method, the Montessori method. So, Maria was born in Italy in 1870, and her mother was also an elementary school teacher before she became married and had children. Now, at the age of 20, Maria decided she wanted to do something a little bit different and didn't really want to become a teacher like her mother, and she decided she wanted to become a doctor. So she went to the University of Rome and spoke with one of the deans there and told her plans to become a doctor. And the dean kind of just laughed and scoffed in her face and said, "Oh, that'll never happen. Women can't study medicine." So Maria went on to prove that dean and many others wrong and was the first woman at the University of Rome to complete her medical studies degree. Now, she was also one of the first campaigners for equal rights for women at the time, and at 26, she was also asked to speak at the first International Women's Conference in Berlin just shortly after graduating with that medical studies degree. And then I also have my fun fact up in the corner that says Maria was a 3-time nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is also incredibly impressive. So, the journey to education. How did Maria go from becoming a doctor to becoming the educational reformist that we know her as today? Well, shortly after graduating, Maria went to work at a hospital in Rome, and at this hospital, she just started to develop a particular interest in the psychology unit there. So one day, she was able to go visit one of the children's wards in the psychology unit, and she was really kind of taken aback. The children were locked away, and they didn't have really any mental stimulation or anything to do. They were kind of just sitting idle, and they were underdeveloped, and it was just kind of a mess. And she kind of knew this is where she needed to be. So when the other staff member kind of apologized for the state that the ward was in, Maria decided that she was going to work with these children. And from working with these children, she started to develop what we know today as the Montessori method. And she saw astonishing results and advancements in these children's development through these beginnings of her teaching. She also began to work with kind of other underprivileged children in the area, as well as children with learning disabilities, and was still kind of able to critique and finalize this method that she'd been working on, known as the Montessori method. So, putting it all in practice, a couple years after she was working with the children at the hospital in Rome, in 1906, Maria opened her first children's house called Casa di Bambini, where she was fully able to implement her methodology and practices in education. Now, this first children's house still continued to just serve underprivileged children or children whose parents were in poverty, and a lot of these children were written off by previous educators as kind of like a lost cause and unruly, but Maria believed in them and she believed firmly in her practices as well. And at this school, like I said, she was able to fully implement those practices, and she again saw amazing advancements in these children's educational careers and development overall. So, what is the Montessori method all about? Well, one of its core beliefs, obviously, is sensory stimulation, and that kind of has to do with how she goes about educating these children. But all of that is also backed up by her core beliefs that human rights and respect are a huge thing for her. Maria lived through one of the first world wars, and through that, she saw directly how war could affect children's education and overall mental being. And so she was also a big advocate for peace and how that could impact the classroom as a whole. So she also believed that children should be respected, and then in turn they will respect others. So kind of at that core, she believed that if we as the adults show respect towards the children, they will in turn show respect to us as well as their peers. Now, with her approach, she believed that children naturally wanted to learn, and so she wanted to let them learn by doing. And how this might look is kind of through the setup of the classroom. And when we're particularly talking about younger elementary age students, this might be like a coat rack is at the child's level. So instead of the children relying on the adult to take their coat and hang it up, because it's at their level and because they have that natural urge to learn to do, because we've made it accessible for them in a way, they in turn will want to learn to do it and have that drive. Another big thing in the approach is that children will learn from others. So, again, kind of going back to that coat rack example, if a child is unfamiliar with hanging up a coat on a coat rack because maybe at their home they'd never done that before, but they see another child or another one of their peers take their coat off and put it on the coat rack, they might learn from that child. And then the next day, they might come in and put their coat on the coat rack. And this kind of lends into the mixed age groups as well. So Maria didn't believe in kind of separating children by traditional grade levels or age groups, kind of like what we do today. She would have larger age group chunks, if that makes sense. So the younger children might learn from the older children. Again, kind of going back to that coat rack example, maybe a younger child had never seen a coat rack before and they didn't know what to do with it. Again, they may see an older child put their coat on the coat rack and then learn from it again. They could also learn from the older children or from these mixed age groups more social skills as well. So maybe if they see an older child leading by example and waiting their turn to wash their hands before they go to lunch, the younger child might see that older child displaying that social skill and they might in tune follow. She also believed that each material has a purpose in the realm of education. And again, going back to those kind of younger grade levels, to not necessarily overstimulate them by like, oh, this material can do this, 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 and this. They were kind of just streamlined in and they could learn slowly and then build off of that. She also believed another big one was to follow the child. And this kind of goes along with the child has a sense of autonomy in what they learn and how they learn it. And this was because she believed in observing the child and learning their interests and then using those interests to kind of develop the curriculum. So if she had a bunch of children that were interested in cooking, she may use the kitchen as a tool to educate on more standard curriculum, if that makes sense. So if they're really interested, like I said, in the kitchen, she may do some science experiments in the kitchen and using household ingredients to see what kind of reactions you could get. Like you have the acids and the base. You know, what can we find in the kitchen that's an acid? What can we find in the kitchen that's a base? And how can we work with that? She was also a big believer in using real life experiences to develop curriculum and kind of educate these children. So again, if we're going back to that kitchen example, if they're really interested in the kitchen, she may start teaching them skills in the kitchen and, you know, how do you properly wash fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, and using those real world experiences that are important to carry on outside of the classroom as well. Now, I've talked a lot about the Montessori method at approach for elementary school children. And now, as a student in the MAT program for secondary education, I want to talk a little bit about how this approach could be transferred into a secondary grade level as well. A lot of these skills, such as follow the child or learning from the student or children being naturally drawn to learn and to learn by doing, a lot of that is easily transferable at any age level. So learning with the real world experiences, we might see that in an English classroom. If we want to do a unit on technical writing, if a student is interested in technical writing, I'd say, okay, you know, here's an instruction manual from a piece of furniture. I want you to look at it and then try and create your own version of it if you're interested in that. Or, you know, that could be a math teacher talking about how this math that they're learning in calculus or anything like that, how that could transfer over to the real world, even if these children aren't necessarily interested in a career in math as a whole. And then again, children having some sort of autonomy in how they learn, I think that's really important. Even in a modern classroom today, we know that children have different approaches to how they learn best. Some are visual learners. And so if you're able to take the time and see how your class as a whole learns best, you can kind of develop some of your activities based on that to kind of cater to their preferences. If children thrive in a group setting, maybe you'll implement more group projects into your classroom lesson plans versus if you have a year where children prefer to work more independently, maybe you wouldn't do that year. Or maybe children are really into doing hands-on projects or learning from creating. You might try and implement more of those like hands-on creation type projects in your classroom versus if the children were less interested in that as well. So overall, the Montessori method, I think, is really beneficial for pretty much any child at any age level. And I think there are elements and pieces of it that everyone could take and implement into their classroom, and you would be able to see benefits from the Montessori method through implementing it with your students. And for kind of a fun little ending activity, my question is, what would a perfect school day look like using the Montessori method, or an element of the Montessori method look like to you or to your students? So yeah, that was my presentation on Maria Montessori and her methods in teaching.